ever watched your child do something incredibly frustrating and thought, this can't be normal? Maybe they asked the same question 15 times. Maybe they interrupted a conversation. Maybe they restarted the same exact sentence over and over and over and never completed a thought. Maybe they had a complete meltdown because their toast broke in half. Maybe they followed you into the bathroom and stared directly into your soul while you were just trying to have 30 seconds of privacy. If any of that sounds familiar, I have some good news. Your child might be completely normal. Unfortunately, developmentally appropriate and personally irritating are often the same exact behavior. Today we're talking about why some of the behaviors that drive parents absolutely crazy are actually signs of normal childhood development, and how misunderstanding what's developmentally appropriate can cause us to expect more from our kids than they're capable of giving. Welcome back to Kid Logic Labs. I'm Leanne, and you're in the Parent Lab. One of the biggest sources of stress in parenting isn't actually our children's behaviors. It's a story we're telling ourselves about the behavior. When a child has a meltdown, we might think they should know better. When they forget something for the 10th time, we think that they aren't listening. When they interrupt us, we think they're being rude. But what if they're not being rude? What if they're 4 or 6 or 8? One of the most important things I learned working with children and having my own is that normal child development is often much messier than people expect. And they're all different. Every child develops differently. Children are not miniature adults. Their brains are still developing. Their emotional regulation is still developing. Their attention is still developing. Their impulse control is still developing, and their ability to think through consequences, still developing. In other words, they're trying the best with the equipment that's still under construction. This reminds me of something we do in parent-child interaction therapy, or PCIT. One of the tools we use to assess is called the Iberg Child Behavior Inventory, or the ECBI. Parents rate different child behaviors and how much those behaviors are a problem for them. What's fascinating is that many parents come into treatment convinced that certain behaviors mean that something's wrong with their child. But as we go through the list together, they often discover something comforting and surprising. Many of the behaviors they're worried about are incredibly common. Arguing, whining, dawdling, tantrums, getting upset when they don't get their way, following directions, interrupting conversations, distraction, testing limits. While these behaviors are absolutely frustrating, it doesn't automatically mean they're abnormal. Sometimes it means your child is acting exactly like a child. When I was doing therapy, parents would often come in terrified that a behavior meant something is wrong. And while there are certainly times when concerns deserve further evaluation, I've also seen parents become worried about behaviors that are incredibly common in childhood. A child being emotional doesn't automatically mean anxiety. A child being active doesn't automatically mean ADHD. A child having meltdowns doesn't automatically mean something's wrong. Sometimes it means that they're 3. One of my favorite examples is what I call the verbal kid trap. Have you ever met a child who talks like a tiny adult? Maybe they use big words. Maybe they have amazing conversations. Maybe they sound incredibly mature. Those kids can trick us. I once spent 10 minutes explaining something to a child who looked like they were getting it. They were nodding. They agreed. They looked completely engaged. And I can't remember what it was, but something made me think to ask if they understood a certain word that I used because it was like a big word. So I finally asked the question. I said, "Do you know what that means?" And they looked at me mid-nod and they said, "No." Not a little no, a complete no. They had absolutely no idea what I was talking about, like the whole entire time. And so I'm thinking we're vibing, right? I'm thinking they're getting it. We had a great session, but they just knew it seemed important and they wanted to please me, so they acted like they understood exactly what I was talking about because they understood social cues. And parents run into this all the time. A child may have advanced language skills, but their understanding, reasoning, emotional regulation, and impulse control are still developing. Just because they can say it doesn't mean they can do it. And just because they can repeat your explanation doesn't mean they truly understand it. This is where it's important to learn where your child is at specifically and meet them there. Break things down into smaller pieces. Use simpler language. Verbal comprehension varies so much from child to child, and just because they look like they understand what you're talking about does not mean they actually do. Then there are behaviors that are developmentally appropriate and deeply annoying, like asking why over and over, following you everywhere, interrupting conversations, forgetting things you literally just told them, wanting independence one minute and then help the next, having big feelings and reactions about very small problems. All of these behaviors are tied to normal development. They're signs of growing brains learning how the world works. Unfortunately, growing brains are not always convenient for the adults living with them. Now, before anyone misunderstands me, normal doesn't mean easy. Normal doesn't mean enjoyable. Normal doesn't mean you have to like it. I have 4 kids. I understand this on a deeply personal level. Knowing behavior is developmentally appropriate does not magically make me enjoy being interrupted while I'm trying to think. It does not make me love answering the same questions 12 times in a row. It doesn't make me excited about a meltdown over the wrong colored cup. But it does change the story. Instead of, what is wrong with this child, I can ask, what skills are they developing here? Instead of, they should know better, I can ask, are they actually capable right now of what I'm expecting? And sometimes the answer is no. Not because they're defiant, not because they're lazy, not because something's wrong, but because they're still learning. One of the greatest gifts we can give ourselves as parents is realistic expectations. When our expectations match our child's developmental ability, parenting becomes less confusing. We stop seeing normal childhood behaviors as evidence that we've failed. We stop assuming every challenge needs a diagnosis. We stop comparing our child to an unrealistic version of what we think children should be, and we start seeing them for who they actually are. A child. A wonderfully imperfect, messy, learning, growing child. And while that doesn't make developmentally appropriate behaviors any less irritating, it can make them a whole lot less scary. Thank you so much for spending time with me in the lab today. You're doing great.
Thanks again for joining me in the lab. If this video helped you better understand your child, give it a like and subscribe to my channel so we can keep learning and growing together.